Hello, we are Group 6, and today we will be discussing the Starbucks case study. In this presentation, we will be discussing the supply chain of Starbucks prior to 2008 and the problems associated with it. Next, we will talk about what Starbucks did to transform its whole supply chain and the results that came with it. Finally, the team will discuss the three recommendations we brainstormed and came up with for Starbucks to further improve its supply chain.
Starbucks was founded in 1971 by Jerry Baldwin, and it quickly stood out from its competitors. Since its first store opened in Seattle, Starbucks has exponentially grown. In the early 2000s, there was a very rapid growth, and in 2005, with 10,241 stores opened worldwide, they had a goal to open 40,000 stores by the end of 2007. At that time, they had a gross margin of 17.1, an increase in income of 31.4%, and an increase of same-store sales of 8%. In 2006, however, some issues started to be seen that were putting Starbucks' future in danger. Starbucks store designs were streamlined, and in 2006, Starbucks not only started to lose its essence, but they started losing customers to competitors, such as McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts. Also, customers' relationships were compromised. There was a brand dilution and a lack of supply chain focus that started to worry Starbucks executives. In 2007, they were the largest specialty coffee retailer in the world and a market leader in the young sector, but negative symptoms like low fill rates, stores failing to place orders, low customer satisfaction, and poor location of new stores made them realize it was time to act. Sales started to decrease as same-store sales were declining from an 8% increase in 2005 to a 5% increase in 2007. And the net income was having smaller increases, from a 31.4% increase in 2005 to a 17.7% increase in 2007. In 2008, there was about 16,680 stores worldwide and 83,000 deliveries per week. Supply chain costs largely increased, and Howard Schultz, who stepped down from CEO in the early 2000s to be in charge of Starbucks' international expansion, returned to CEO to stabilize the company. He put Peter Gibbons, who was the head of manufacturing, in charge of the supply chain, and the transformation agenda was developed. In that same year, they closed 600 US stores, and the competition was still gaining traction. All these events led to Starbucks having a supply chain surplus decrease due to a neglect of supply chain fundamentals during the growth rate.
65 to 70% of Starbucks supply chain costs are derived from outsourcing agreements. This leaves little room for the management team to maneuver through this crisis. In order to illustrate what parts of the supply chain Starbucks has outsourced, we have looked at the coffee bean process. All coffee beans are sourced externally, namely from local farmers in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. They are shipped to the US and then moved directly to storage sites, some of which are owned by Starbucks, while some of the storage space is outsourced. All coffee beans need to be roasted. This is done at any of the 4 Starbucks coffee plants around the US, which are illustrated on the map below. All of the green dots illustrate Starbucks cafes around the country. After they've been roasted and packaged, the coffee beans are delivered to regional distribution offices, of which 2 are owned by Starbucks and 3 are operated by external providers. It's then optional to move some of the coffee beans into smaller central distribution centers. These are close to clusters of Starbucks cafes, and there are 33 of the central distribution centers in total, some of which are internal, some of which are outsourced. Finally, the coffee beans are distributed to retail stores and outlets by trucks, both operated by Starbucks and by external providers. Secondly, we looked at the competitive strategy of Starbucks and derived it from the mission statement in 2006. We found it to be: bring quality coffee to neighborhoods through centrally located stores with a strong sense of belonging. We are now going to look into whether they achieved strategic fit or not.
Since Starbucks produced in large quantities and tried to minimize costs by economies of scale, they sought a highly efficient supply chain rather than a responsive one. A responsive one being short response time to market change, for example, adapting to trends, which is irrelevant to Starbucks. They had a relatively low implied demand uncertainty. However, as the market grew and changed, this was uncertain. To evaluate the implied demand uncertainty, we must assess the most relevant customer attributes to the case. Starting with price. Customers are willing to pay high prices for coffee for the premium Starbucks experience. With regards to service level, customers expect high quality products and service. And variety. Customers are aware of the Starbucks selection of products and expect them to always be in stock. And finally, innovation. Customers like the range of drinks with new flavors. And based on test results ranking coffee based on taste, the customers actually preferred the cheaper Robusta bean over the Starbucks expensive Arabica bean. The supply chain drivers determine performance in terms of efficiency and responsiveness, and whether strategic fit is achieved or not. We picked and analyzed the most important parameters of the supply chain for this case. Starting with information. The lack of order management, in which people do not make orders correctly, has proven to be problematic, which continues to contribute to a low fill rate, showing bad coordination between stages in the supply chain. People are too focused on expansion and meeting demand that the information portion was overlooked or overloaded. Stores only had a 35% chance of receiving all the supplies they needed on a given day. This lack of information and order management proved to be less efficient as a supply chain. With regards to sourcing and facilities, there are 3 coffee roasting plants in the US and 1 additional tea plant, but they had 24 co-manufacturers, most of them international, just for their beans. Most of the regional and central distribution centers were owned by third-party logistics companies. And due to the high level of outsourcing and third-party logistic companies, Starbucks has less control over their supply chain. Outsourcing is always a balance between mitigating risk versus losing control over your own supply chain. Finally, pricing. There was a mismatch between the premium price of Starbucks and the customer experience, the experience that they were actually receiving. Thus, the company has to rebuild the brand's former reputation. There is a lack of consistency between customer priorities outlined in the competitive strategy and supply chain capabilities that they are unable to deliver as promised. Plus, the efficiency is not achieved, but desperately needed to meet the relatively certain demand in a cost-effective manner. This is entirely a push-driven supply chain. Starbucks bear the entire risk and responsibility of both stockouts and carrying too much inventory. This speaks even more towards an extremely efficient, accurate, and highly optimized supply chain, which Starbucks is not yet.
So, we can derive the following supply chain issues from the current situation. Starbucks has failed to make the necessary investment in terms of time and money to build supply chain fundamentals during their rapid expansion. They now lack robust protocols for placing orders in each store, and they're heavily dependent on outsourcing arrangements. These now constitute 65 to 70% of supply chain costs, and Starbucks lack control in every single link of their own supply chain. The final link of the supply chain, namely the one between central distribution centers and stores, is flawed. This results in cost increases propagating throughout the supply chain, and every single time we fail to place an order, there's going to be a recovery costs of refilling that order. We found the root cause of the problem to be lack of supply chain coordination, with the following effects. First of all, the level of product availability directly impacts our customer satisfaction. We know that the customers expect products to be available in a high-end coffee shop, and with a low fill rate and failing to place orders, this is going to cause us issues. Secondly, we have many external parties, which makes it difficult to maintain strong relationships among all of them. This also leads to low efficiency and lower performance. We also identified the following 3 obstacles to supply chain coordination. Information processing. There's a lack of transparency across all links and among our suppliers. Furthermore, we do not share information, and therefore we will not be as efficient. The operational obstacles are due to the lack of alignment of orders, despite having the supply chain and stock to refill them. Lastly, the behavioral obstacles is lack of communication and alignment in terms of quality and delivery expectations. If our suppliers do not know how important our deliveries are, they will not be as consistent in making them.
Starbucks used three common managerial levels to achieve coordination. First, they aligned goals and incentives by simplifying the complex structure they currently used so that every job fell into one of the four basic supply chain functions: plan, source, make, and deliver. For example, workers involved in the production plan, replenishment, or new product launches were put in the production planning. Sourcing activities were grouped into two areas: coffee and non-coffee procurement. All manufacturing was put into make functional unit, and all personnel working on transportation, distribution, and customer service was put into the deliver group. Next, Starbucks improved the information accuracy within its supply chain. They began sharing point of sales and inventory data with all of the links in the supply chain in order to improve information accuracy and engage all the partners in a version of collaborate planning, forecasting, and replenishment, also known as CPFR. Furthermore, Starbucks built strategic partnerships. The team, in fact, created weekly scorecards for measuring the vendors by the following metrics: service, clear cost, and clear productivity. Starbucks also began making service data by store, delivery lane, and SKU available to its supply chain. The company worked towards renegotiating contracts with suppliers to better maximize mutual benefits. By using these managerial levels, the company greatly improved supply chain coordination level, lowered both the variability in orders and deliveries, and lowered costs as well. They also managed to achieve high transparency, which led to improved supply chain performance. Finally, Starbucks redecorated all of its stores and retrained all of its staff to rebuild the old Starbucks experience. Doing this allowed the company to bring back that personal experience in every coffee cup and regain customer loyalty. It also helped the company regain position with high quality and unique Starbucks experience.
In conclusion, Starbucks succeeded in achieving strategic fit. They managed to once again meet customers' expectations and support daily operations by leveraging a strong supply chain, heavily investing in building relationships with good suppliers, and recalibrating the local Starbucks experience. However, there are a few things they could have done in order to further improve. For example, they could have modified their logistic practices of DCs to break bulk and cross-docking strategies in order to bring down weekly deliveries. They could have also insourced crucial operation components to regain control and bring down costs. And finally, they could have implemented a structured periodic replenishment policy in each store in order to enforce weekly ordering routines. Out of the three mentioned options, our recommendation would be to implement a structured periodic replenishment policy. This would be easy to implement weekly, as their deliveries are done every week, and it would have a large long-term benefits in the previously identified issues. The order up to level would help all stores not run out of supplies.
Starbucks' effort to transform their company as well as supply chain and regain their customer loyalty rewarded them in the early 2009. Starbucks encountered a $400 million savings from the supply chain after the transformation. This mainly came from the negotiation of contracts of the 3PLs to depend on performance. Next, Starbucks increased its order fill rate to 90%. This helped to build trust among employees in the robustness of the new supply chain. Also, Starbucks successfully rebuilt its brand's loyalty. In 2009, it was ranked the most deeply engaged brand on social media. In fact, they showed to be very proactive and be able to successfully engage customers through product innovations. Finally, these are the sources the team and I used to analyze the Starbucks case study. Thank you for watching.